In this nugget, we're going to learn about alliteration. First, we're going to learn what alliteration is. Alliteration is when a writer chooses to use the same sound at the start of two or more nearby words. Now, let's look at some examples of alliteration. Marvellous May. This is an example of alliteration of the letter M. The letter M is used at the start of both words, marvellous and May. Delightful Daisy, Seven Sisters, and Counting Coins are all examples of alliteration too. Now it's your turn. Can you think of an example of alliteration? Pause the video and have a think. Note down your answers and we'll go over some possible answers at the end. Now we're going to have a go at writing some longer and more sophisticated examples of alliteration. Let's start by looking at this picture of a brook, the name for a small stream. We need some words beginning with B that help us describe this brook. We want to describe the brook using words that will create an image in the reader's mind of the lively body of water rushing along. We need some more words beginning with B that create a sense of the way the water moves and sounds. Bubbling creates the impression of the way the water moves, and babbling creates an impression of the sound it makes. Both words begin with the letter B. Now let's write this in a sentence. As I rounded the corner, a bubbling, babbling brook came into view. We can see that the letter B has been used at the beginning of three words: bubbling, babbling, and brook. Now let's explore the effect of this. What is the effect of using alliteration? The repetitive use of the B sound evokes the bouncing motion of the stream, suggesting it is almost alive. Now let's look at a second example. It was snowing. Fluffy flakes floated through the air. In this example, it is two letters that have been repeated, F and L, making the fl sound. We can see that the same letters have been used at the beginning of three words: fluffy, flakes, and floated. What is the effect of using alliteration here? The repetitive use of the F sound creates a soft, light, airy sound which reflects the soft, light snowflakes that drift through the air. Now we're going to explore a common misconception. Sometimes we learn alliteration as the repetition of the same letter at the start of two words. However, this is not quite right. Alliteration is actually when a writer chooses to use the same sound at the start of two or more nearby words. We're going to look at some examples to explain this in more detail. So let's look at our first example, thirsty tiger. Both words, thirsty and tiger, start with the letter T, but this is not an example of alliteration because the T and the sound are different. So it uses the same letter, but it makes a different sound. Now let's look at a different example. The menacing man moved. This is an example of alliteration where the letter and the sound is the same. The words menacing, man, and moved all start with the same letter M, which makes the same sound. Same letter, same sound. Now, let's look at our final example, one Wobbly Walrus. This is an example of alliteration where the letter is not the same, but the sound is the same. One starts with the letter O, and Wobbly and Walrus begin with the letter W. However, the sound they make is the same, so this is an example of alliteration. This is an example of alliteration where the letter is different, but the sound is the same. From these three examples, we can see that alliteration is when a writer chooses to use the same sound at the start of two or more nearby words. Sometimes there might be examples of words that start with the same letter, but it is not alliteration, like thirsty tiger and shiny snow. You can have words that begin with the same letter and the same sounds, like menacing man and sunlight sizzled. Sometimes there might be examples of words that start with different letters, but it is alliteration, like one wobbly walrus and the short chef. Now, let's see if the examples you chose at the beginning were correct. You may have chosen to complete the sun with the word shines. The sun shines. But this is not an example of alliteration because the s and sh sound are different. However, if you went for a word like sizzled, this would be correct because the s sound is the same. Now let's check to see if you used alliteration correctly in the other examples. You could have chosen to describe David using an adjective that began with the same D sound, like dangerous David or dazzling David. You might have chosen to put the word wind in the next example so that it became the wind whooshes. You might have chosen a word beginning with an R sound, like red roses or red rubies for the final example. Remember, alliteration is when a writer chooses to use the same sound at the start of two or more nearby words.